here also. I'll wait for Nick to join us. Morning, Nick. Morning, Emma. Just a quick note for colleagues. I've just dropped a little form out, a little poll out in the side chat bar, which I'd really encourage you to join in with. I recognise entirely that kind of chatting in the chat bar is a bit of a sort of an impossibly like an exposing or embarrassing thing, but we really would like comments and questions and feedback. It's really helpful for us. So I know Nick and Emma will be encouraging that, no doubt, during their input, but be super if you were able to complete those polls and join in with any comments and questions. Likewise, we are going to be tweeting with the hashtag EdTech21. So please do join in on the Twitter conversation if you'd like to. So without further ado, and running almost to time, which is pretty good, Emma and Nick. So Emma works with us at the Trust as our research and CPD lead, and is author of two really great books. One around flexible working and one around thinking more like a toddler, which are in reference to leadership. Generally, and Nick, famed for her being founder of the Global Equality Collective, part of the EdTech 50, which is a real prestigious list to be on. I'm not sure we'll ever be on that, but it'd be, maybe if you're following Nick's footsteps. But also a friend of the Trust, and so we're absolutely thrilled that you can both join us today. So you guys are going to take us through till probably 10:05. And we'll start. Recording's already started, so over to you both.
Good morning. Hi, Nick.
Hello, good morning. How are you?
Yeah, good. That's so strange presenting together yet separately. I don't think I've done this one. So I think I'm going to kick off, aren't I, Nick? And then we're going to come in. But I'm really privileged to work with Nick, because my own EdTech journey has been very rapid over this last year, and Nick has been a key person with all the work that she does with GEC and with EdTech to help me along my journey with EdTech. So thanks, Nick. I'm going to share a couple of slides. Let's have a look what we've got. So it fits in very nicely with what Paul and David were saying. In that at the moment we are in a really huge stage of development with our use of EdTech, and we've come an awful long way. When I think back to about a year ago, maybe 18 months ago, within the profession, and I work with lots of schools, lots of trusts, hundreds of teachers across the sector, across all phases, there were lots of people in the kind of no wheels here camp. There were lots of people kind of working within the EdTech space, really championing the role of EdTech across the sector, but there was kind of a hardcore of no thanks, that's not for us. We're going to stick with kind of inverted commas traditional approaches to teaching and learning. However, what the pandemic did, and what having to move to a remote delivery model did, was it really shone a light for everybody, because they had to engage with EdTech in a way that they hadn't necessarily done before. It really shone a light on the possibility that EdTech provided to enhance what we already know about great teaching and learning. It also underpins one of the teacher standards, which is to take responsibility for improving teaching through appropriate professional development. So as teachers, under the kind of teacher standards umbrella, we do have to engage with things that improve teaching and learning, and we know that EdTech is a way to do that. So all of us have to engage with EdTech, and we can't necessarily be in the no wheels here category. But in terms of ICT and our use of ICT, and what COVID's done is it's given us lots of lessons about remote that we learned through remote delivery and our use of EdTech that we can take forward into that future responsibility for developing our teaching and learning. So I'm going to present a few of them. A few of them are really positive findings. Others potentially throw up a few questions. So the first question that David's kind of touched on and Paul's touched on is, what do we want the legacy of this to be? What do we want our interaction with EdTech to have been, and what do we want the legacy of that to be kind of going forward? What have we learned that we want to hold on to? And also, what did we learn that didn't work particularly well? Because although lots of things worked really well, we did also learn what didn't work particularly well. And we also want to build on this idea of what we can replicate about great teaching and learning through our use of EdTech and through potential either remote delivery, asynchronous delivery, a different form of delivery. So what do we know about attention? What do we know about memory? What do we know about the science of learning that we can replicate really well through EdTech, not just moving everything we do either online or onto a platform or through a device or through a piece of software, actually, what do we know about how people learn, how children learn, and how can we use EdTech to really support that? And one of the key things I wanted to touch on with this was about feedback. There were huge strides made in use of EdTech within feedback through things like kind of verbal recorded delivery, the chance for children to chat with teachers, the chance for children who wouldn't necessarily have been particularly confident in a classroom, who felt more confident to feedback through the screen in their own time, in their own way. But what we mustn't forget with that is that actually we are dealing with humans, and that some of the findings, and if you read anything by Doug Lemov, he talks about the fact that actually the majority of our feedback comes through the eyes. Humans are the only developed mammals to have a really big contrast between the white and the dark of the eye, and that's an evolutionary kind of development advantage, because that's where we get our information from, through the eyes. And one of the things that people found during remote delivery was that was what they missed, literally looking into the eyes of pupils. So one of the things that we need to be mindful of is when we're using technology is that we don't kind of use it in a way that makes it so that we don't use our very best evolutionary human systems, that we actually use it to complement feedback, being one of them. However, what it has done is allowed us enormous flexibility of delivery, flexibility of the timing of the delivery, the type of delivery, where and how we do the delivery. And it's moved away from the teacher in the classroom with all the children all at the same time, you know, with one same adult in the room. That gives huge scope for flexing our curriculum, both in terms of content, both in terms of delivery, both in terms of structure. And it would be foolish of us not to capitalise on that. Especially with things like asynchronous delivery, where children, and the feedback initially from some of the remote learning analysis is that those children who could access asynchronous delivery and could revisit the content again and again and again and stop it when they got stuck and listen to it again, that had huge learning gains for those children. So actually looking at complementing a live delivery in a classroom with opportunities to access asynchronous delivery as well as a complement could be a huge step forward. That allows us to personalise the delivery for our children, personalise the curriculum for them, personalise the support for them. So use of EdTech has huge implications for really honing in on meeting the individual and unique needs of our children in our classes. Culture is an interesting one, and culture covers a few things there. One of the things that a lot of children missed, a lot of children didn't because they don't like it, but a lot of children missed the culture of the classroom, being around peers, learning with peers, live in the moment, around their friends, and in that kind of learning culture of a classroom. Again, not all children like that, but we also need to be mindful of, as if we move children to working individually and potentially remotely on a device or using a piece of software, that we must not, we don't negate the need to develop their social, emotional development and the way that they work with groups and with within a class as well. So it's developing that culture. But within culture as well comes teachers' attitudes and behaviour towards the use of EdTech. And as I said, I think we've made huge strides with that one in terms of embracing that. Alongside culture comes child development alignment. One of the things about EdTech is that great, you can meet the needs of lots of children in lots of different ways, but there are some aspects of child development which need not a caveat around them, but it's to recognise that there are some things which do need to still be done live. For example, correcting a pencil grip so that a child can write correctly, how to sit and hold paper at a table, how to do physical skills. The Youth Sport Trust has they did some work with our trust the other week, and only 19 or 20% of children of primary age are actually meeting the daily recommended movement targets for their age group in order for health and well-being. So when we are moving towards using technology, it's to supplement, enhance, and really support what we're doing, not to necessarily replace everything else that is going on in the classroom, especially around movement, especially around child development, especially around social and emotional development within larger groups. it has really supported communication between parents and teachers, teachers and students, and it's really kind of opened up opportunities for us to communicate in different ways through lots of different platforms and gain a lot of kind of in the moment feedback in terms of using things like quizzing, using things like forms, using things like polls. It's made collection of data really quite streamlined and really quite effective. We do need to capitalise on confidence at the moment, because there are lots of teachers, lots of staff who are actually far more confident now with EdTech than they have ever been. And if we kind of move straight back to a kind of traditional classroom delivery without capitalising on that confidence, we're kind of missing a trick. The seduction element, the seduction bit is linked to confidence as well. There are lots and lots of apps, lots of software, lots of hardware, lots of systems, lots of platforms which claim to really promote excellence in teaching and learning, and it can be really easy to be seduced by those. However, what we need to also recognise is what we know about attention, what we know about memory, what we know about cognitive load, and also recognising that a lot of the devices that we are using with children, a lot of these devices are designed to distract. So we are actually teaching children using devices which are designed to distract them. And what we know about attention and what we know about memory is that attention is the gatekeeper of learning. We have to keep children's attention and getting them to attend to the right thing, the actual learning, rather than what it's packaged up in. Attention is the gatekeeper of memory, and memory is the kind of the gatekeeper of learning. So we really need to make sure that what we're using, that we're really strict with it, that we're not seduced by it, and actually focus on are the things that we are using in our classrooms with our children the best way of ensuring attention and harnessing attention for memory and for learning, which links to cognition. And for an example of this is there was some research out this week from Paul Kirshner about actually writing on paper with a pen has much greater improvements in memory and cognition than writing on a screen. Now, it may well be that what we encourage is use of screens and stylus and all these sorts of things, but actually when we go back to what we know about child development, about brain development, about memory and learning, that actually we mustn't throw out what we do know really works in favour of being kind of seduced by EdTech. So it's about being really rigorous and systematic about why we would choose to use the tools, the EdTech tools that we use in our classrooms. However, what we have got is a situation now where we've gone from kind of no wheels here, potentially as a profession, through to potentially being on that kind of bone shaker bike, that there is a lot going on, but it's not yet fully across the system. It's a little bit shaky. There are variants in terms of confidence, in terms of use, in terms of effectiveness across the system. What we do need to do as a system now is to move towards this kind of Olympic gold medal winning team here by looking at that theory of marginal gains that they used, by looking at what we know already works with our equivalent of cycling. What do we know already works in terms of teaching, learning, memory, attention, retention, and child development? And how can we use EdTech to add value to every little part of what we already know, so that we get that idea of marginal gains? So that's kind of my take on the overview of what's happened in the sector, what's happened sort of research wise. And I think Nick, if I come out of here, I think Nick's going to jump in and add her fantastic EdTech, put her EdTech hat on and talk about your side of things.
Thanks, Emma. Where to begin? I think it's really interesting. I've got kind of two hats, I suppose, for this conversation. The first one is as the co-founder of the Global Equality Collective. We are a digitalised solution for diversity and inclusion. And the work that we've done under lockdown has started with being funded for an app for schools and businesses, and how we've worked with our online communities and our collective subject matter experts So that's been one side of things. The other side of it is I've been the Southwest Regional Lead for the EdTech Demonstrator Programme. So in that guise, I have seen firsthand how on a national scale, schools and colleges have responded to the lockdown. And what's really interesting for me is, you know, I started teaching in 2001 and was an advanced skills teacher of new technologies. So it's really interesting for me to see how everyone else has kind of been on this journey using technology. And it's really interesting to hear the speakers this morning talking about personalisation. I very much think that technology is the equaliser of our times. I've seen some comments in from, I think it's from Matthew, saying about how some of the more vulnerable children and the key worker children enjoyed being in the smaller classrooms. I know that some students under lockdown have actually thrived using homeschooling, that they don't want to have the socialisation of corridors and things like that. So I kind of see at the moment the system is having growing pains, and there's still this kind of, as you said, Emma, kind of chucking things out. There's almost like this binary, like we use tech or we don't use tech. And actually, I think there's a couple of things. The first thing I would say it needs to happen is a kind of reflection on what works. We know as teachers, we've been on our own journey with technology and lockdown. And that has differed classroom to classroom, let alone within one organisation. And it's working out how can we upskill everyone, maybe those couple of percentages, and get it right and get a kind of consistent approach going through. The other bit is looking at where our skills and our knowledge and our dispositions are when it comes to using technology. The more confident people become with using technology, they are more able to kind of see it as a pick and mix, as a kind of toolbox, and they can choose what they want and reject what they don't want. So we're obviously in Teams at the moment. I know that many schools have rejected Teams for using that with their early years and Key Stage 1 students, and they've gone a different route. I know that a lot of staff teams really prefer Teams and they really like the way that works. And we're seeing that administrative staff are having to get up to speed with where the teachers have kind of got more used to this over the last year. So I think that there's a couple of different ways that the teachers and for the staff bodies need to kind of address where they are and kind of reflect and look what suits them all, and have those conversations around it. The other side is then looking at the students. I would say that going back to classes of 30, there's been huge lessons learned. And why would you get rid of those great wins that you guys have had? I was in a conversation with 12 assistant principals in Bristol last week, and they were saying, you know, one was saying, can't wait to going back to kind of normal, and the other was saying, there's no way I'd go back to the olden days. You know, I've learned so much. There's so much tech that's made my life easier and reduced, you know, what I was doing before in terms of saving me time. So I think really when it comes to looking at, you know, from a systemic level, it's looking at what's worked. It's looking at how you can help staff dispositions get more comfortable and more confident using the technology, but also really addressing how technology can help advance education in the classrooms. And for some, that will be looking at how you maintain those small groups with having some learning online, some having a face-to-face with the teacher, and kind of really working out where the strengths are having teacher directives focused time, with times that students can use screens and use different tools which will help them as they learn in a way that they want to learn, at speed that they want to learn. So that's what I'd kick off with, Emma.
It's really interesting to say about the class sizes. Do you know where the class size of 30 comes from?
Pardon?
Do you know where the class size of 30 comes from?
Tell me, Emma.
It's an old military thing, because that's the number of soldiers a sergeant major could be seen to control in the army at any one time. They're in groups of 30, and it was just translated directly across the classrooms. There's no science about why it's 30. It's just an old military hangover. So it's got absolutely nothing to do with learning or cognition or anything to do with that.
It's mad, isn't it? I mean, when I was teaching, I remember I started in 2005. I worked at a new Labour Academy, and it was a building schools for the future. It was, you know, it was absolutely brilliant. It was all, you know, shiny, fantastic. but we didn't actually have the money where we needed it. And so I remember recording myself in a kind of flipped learning style, recording myself at lunchtimes to then have it on the screen, so then I could work as a teaching assistant with my students, because we didn't have a teaching assistant with this particular year 10 group that needed help. And I remember using, I didn't really want anyone coming in and see me. I was frightfully embarrassed. I was always a techie person with a black t-shirt behind a camera, not in front of it. And I realised then that actually how you can kind of personalise and break off classes using technology in different ways. And that's what I've tried to do, you are always a teacher, James. That's what I kind of tried to do. What's really interesting, from a parent point of view, my oldest son's autistic, and actually seeing him navigate things. He did not like home learning from a screen, and he got a place back in the school, which was great. And he was really fearful of all the students coming back. And he's still really not very happy about having a class of 30. He liked the smaller classes. He liked the quiet classroom. He liked having that attention. So it's really interesting. And I think that needs to be learned as well, and maybe even put a little bit more to the forefront of how, as an individual teacher and grown up, I feel about technology, but actually how these students are feeling at the moment. And I know that's a big ask, and we think that we always think about the students first, but having time to kind of reflect on that, I think is a massive thing.
I think is it the Japanese that have the same word for problem as opportunity?
Yeah.
So actually we're at that kind of point now where it's like, what do you want to keep in your boat? What do you want to chuck out the boat to carry on going forwards? Because there's been so many lessons learned, and what the pandemic has done is it's shone a light on the fact that nothing can't change. There is absolutely nothing that you genuinely have to hold on to, because we have, assessments have changed, delivery changed, the use of tech changed, the groupings of children's changed, the school times and start and finish times have changed. Who's inverted commas allowed to stand in front of the children and deliver the content has changed. There is absolutely nothing that can't change. It's just deciding, as a group, as an individual, as a professional, which bits do you want to change, why, and having the rationale for that, and the research backing for that, and actually how do you want to address what could be a problem as an opportunity, and take that forward with what works.
There's also kind of the other side. I've seen people put about parents. I'd like to comment on that in a moment, but this has disrupted the sector. There's no doubt about it that we in the way that schools not only run on a day-to-day, but relationships with the government, relationships with parents, all those kinds of things. It's all been kind of thrown up in the air, and as a sector, everyone's sort of head down, got on with it, because that's what teachers do, that's what we're good at. But there is that time to start thinking about, well, where are the opportunities? It's been tough, it's been hard, and I think the most recent lockdown was probably the most stressful, with the use of live lessons and that kind of moving on, the amount of hours that were meant to be happening for both students and for families, the amount of critical worker students in the classrooms, of which 36,000 were teachers' children as well, and kind of looking at forward, well, what do we do next, and where do we want to go next with this? There's been an awful lot of work done with helping with kind of broadband, with helping with devices, and that's still going on. Things like the Rural Gigabit programme, things like Bridge the Divide from London Grid for Learning. And people kind of want to change, and also maybe change up the conversations as well. And that's where sort of bringing in the global equality work, where people are really seeing this change as, how can we be more inclusive now? How can we help that diversity and inclusion, that disadvantage? Where have we got these privileges within this? And personally, I think as teachers, we've seen within our own families how that's been disrupted with lockdown. And I think there's now a lot more empathy from teachers of parents who are going through tricky situations, because maybe they've been in a more tricky situation than they've been before. And also there is that kind of relationship with parents that I'm starting to see on the other side, which is getting a little bit frayed as well, in that some schools are putting out large amounts of homework and kind of measuring and the quizzes and things, which you know, a lot of parents are saying, you know, we've just done homeschooling for 3 months. We want our weekends back. We want to, you know, relax a little bit while we're sorting everything out. And I think that's another area that this kind of brings in is, you know, that conversation that we've had with parents about learning and how much they appreciate what teachers do, maybe more than ever's happened in the history of schools. Actually, what can we do to kind of make learning a more, I don't know, more continuation, I suppose, of those conversations are learning from home to school too.
Definitely. Hello, James.
Hi. Hi. Your debate's really brilliant. I mean, I think probably people could sit and listen to you reflect all day, and I suspect it mirrors a lot of people's dialogue, internal dialogue about, you know, what about this, what about that, when I was this, and, you know, and so on. It's really useful, to listen to, and also it sparked a bit of conversation in the chat bar as well, which is great too. So thank you for that. Really good. I mean, there's a couple of things, Emma, just to pick up on that you mentioned about the whole idea of repeating and replaying content, which I think is, of course, brilliant for pupils in terms of, you know, repetition of skills and taking on new knowledge. But I think it's also true of adults as well. I think having, you know, even from real basic things through to, you know, more complex things, being able to listen into meetings that you weren't able to attend if you get the time, and, you know, actually just simple instructional videos about how, you know, how you upload something. That whole culture, you know, that whole, you know, self-taught stuff is really thriving, I think, which is great. I was also interested in your comments around daily movement for children, and obviously I know about that youth sport trust stuff you referenced last week, but I wonder what that looks like for adults in our country. I think that's a little bit of a scary thing to reflect on, particularly those that are not in the teaching profession. But also one of the things just to share with colleagues that are not necessarily from our trust or teaching school partnership, but an exercise that might be worth thinking about running in school is we recently did a whole couple of hours on what have we learned during lockdown that we want to retain. So what do we not want to lose in a whole manner of ways. So whether that's around governance, whether that's around teaching and learning in the classroom, whether that's to do with school operational management, whether it's to do with leadership. There are some really good things that have come from the last year that we really shouldn't lose sight of. And in some extent, it's accelerated progress in lots of ways, which maybe we never would have got there if not before. So Nick and Emma, thank you so much for your input there. I really appreciate the time you've taken to do that. Colleagues, please do carry on commenting in the chat bar. It's great to see what's going off. Thank you, Emma.